Good morning. Welcome to Rose Hill. We're so glad to have you all here this morning. And if you're visiting with us, we're glad to have you here as well. We ask that you stick around after the service so we can get to know you a little bit. We're so glad to have you here. I have several announcements before I get started. So just prepare. If you noticed in your bulletin, it is filled with so many updates, things coming up, which is so good. But this week specifically is a very busy week. We have Lads to Leaders convention this week, which is so exciting. We're so proud of our Lads to Leaders kids and teens, and just so proud of all the work they've accomplished. But if you open your bulletin, especially our Lads to Leaders parents, I just want you to know that I've put together a nice little update of things that are going to go on this week, especially for just expected costs and for hotel costs and food costs and parking costs. And in my email I sent out to you, Facebook post I sent out, I also put some links for what size car you might have, and there's some, if your car's too big, you have to pay more. So I just ask that you take some time to read that. There's a lot there, a lot to take in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. But I also want to announce that on April 16th, we have discussed about having a Lads to Leaders recap meeting, just a time where we get together, have a potluck, and just discuss what went right this year with Lads to Leaders and maybe some things that could have gone better. So just prepare for that discussion. Our VBS committee will also be meeting that week as well, right after that meeting. And a couple more things before we get started. Something else that's just around the corner, not too far away. Summer's almost here, and with summer comes Vacation Bible School. And we have come up with a theme this year. It's called Fearless. So that's our theme this year for our kids, is Fearless. And for those of you that volunteer with VBS, if you go to your bulletin, I wouldn't suggest filling it out right now because we're about to get to the sermon, but there's a QR code if you are somebody who has helped with VBS in the past or would like to help. If you just scan that sometime, fill it out. We would love for you to be a part of our VBS week, so we would love for you to volunteer for that. And also, on April 23rd, we have our first VBS work day from 1 to 3. So anyways, those are all the announcements. I'm sorry, that's a lot to take in. Luckily, you have a version of it to take home with you, just around the building. But I'm so glad to have you here this morning. Thanks for listening to all my announcements. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But today, I'm going to be talking about this idea of building relationships, but not just relationships, right? That we have or our close relationships, like our best friends or even our family members, but relationships we have with people that we don't believe the same, where we don't believe the same things necessarily, or people who are not Christians. Those are the kinds of relationships that I'm talking about. See, in life we make so many decisions. We come across so many people we have to deal with on a daily basis, and we have to ask ourselves, are we going to have a strong, close relationship with people who don't believe the same things as us? Most of the time we might say to ourselves that we already have our close relationships. We already have our best friends. I don't need another best friend. I've got my top 5. I don't need any more best friends. Or just not pursue any type of relationship at all. In Lads to Leaders this year, we've been talking a lot about this idea of building. Rise up and build out of our sorrows. The Jews coming out of exile to rebuild the temple, to rebuild this communion, this relationship they have with God that they experienced through the temple. But this is a lot about what we've been talking about this year, just this idea of building. And today I want to talk about the idea of building, but I want to talk about, as Christians, how do we build relationships with people who are not Christians? See, when we talk about the idea of building, one thing that sort of precedes that idea is the ability to create. That God made us as creative beings, that He has made humans as people who can create amazing things. And we see this all over the world. We see this in history. We see You just go to any city, you can go around town, even you see buildings, structures, churches, bridges, highways, amazing things across time even. And so humans very obviously have been a very creative people, and we often associate that with more of the here and the now, that today we have created some amazing things, amazing skyscrapers, technology, cell phones, computers, all these great things, and we don't really associate creativity as much with the people of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. But I tell you the truth, that they were just as creative, just as innovative as we are. And I think of, the Romans, right? The Romans built some amazing highways, amazing cities. I especially think of the pyramids of Giza in Egypt, which is, I want to just briefly mention that. The pyramids of Egypt, these structures right here, I've never been there, and I don't know if I ever will end up going, but I know we have several of you in here who have been. I don't know if you've ever been on social media, but the pyramids of Egypt have some incredible theories about how they were built, some of them being that aliens built them. I don't know if you've ever heard that one. The aliens came several thousand years ago, built these pyramids, and I guess just left them there. They thought that was a cool thing to leave here. I'm not condoning that theory, but that's a fun one. My favorite one, however, and I don't know if you've heard of this theory, is that the pyramids used to be a major power hub, that they used to provide electricity to the entire city, powered by the Ark of the Covenant. I don't know if you've heard of that one. The lost Ark of the Covenant used to power the city of Egypt, but that's my favorite theory. But my point is that you ultimately can go to any country in the world, and you can see amazing creations, amazing buildings across time. That creativity and this idea to create is not something that's here and now. It's something that has lasted for thousands of years. All this to point out that God has made humanity to be creative beings, and we can see that in very physical ways. And when talking about building relationships, especially reaching out to people who don't believe the same as us, we're talking about building bridges, about reaching a people that often seem so far away from us. And, sorry, I got my bulletin in the way here. Get that out of the way. And up front, we must recognize that in relationships, it is far easier to burn bridges than it is to build bridges. And this is the kind of relationship that I think we often are infamous for in Christianity, that we often burn bridges with people we don't believe the same as. And it's a shame. It's something that we need to own up to as Christians, that we haven't necessarily, and I'm not necessarily talking about everybody in this room, but we haven't necessarily been a great example of building bridges across time, not just even thousands of years ago even, but even today. We don't do the best job of building and cultivating a good relationships with people who don't believe the same as us. We often burn those bridges, and it's just a great shame. But it's no surprise to you probably that Jesus is all about building relationships. I mean, Jesus is the ultimate bridge between God and us, right? I mean, he came down as a human, God in the flesh. He took the sins of the world and ultimately gave us perfect union with God again. He's the ultimate bridge between us and God. And I love what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save them. and I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. What a beautiful little passage there by Paul. But just basically saying that in order to reach people, or Paul says to win them, that in order to reach people, that he is lowering himself, that he is putting himself in their shoes in order to minister to them. What a concept. That he might be able to save just one person and enjoy God's everlasting blessings with him. I mean, think of the wisdom here, right? I mean, imagine if Paul, a Jew, walked into a Greek city, which he often did, walked into Greek cities, and he just threw the 613 commandments at them, and he just said, hey, you have failed every single one, all 613. You're a sinner, and you're not going to make it. Your relationship with God is lost. I mean, could you imagine if Paul did something like that? I mean, that would be pretty crazy. I would imagine they would have a strong reaction to something like that. Now Paul does get truthful with people, and he can come off as harsh many times. And he's been chased out of cities. He's been stoned for some of the things that he has brought to the table. But the point I'm trying to make is how important it is to consider our context when you are building relationships with people who are different from you. Our context. And I'll give an example. I have a friend or somebody I met through a mission organization. Our home church partners with them up in Cincinnati. But his name is Coleman, and Coleman, I can't remember his last name right now, but Coleman started a ministry called Micah 6, and Coleman graduated from Harding. Coleman felt the call to ministry and service, and I didn't go to Harding with Coleman. Coleman is like 10 years older than me, just by the way. But he said, I'm just going to sell all my belongings. I'm going to pack up my car as tightly as I can pack it, and I'm going to go to one of the most crime-rated cities, the most in-need cities that I can think of. So he packs up his car and he drives to Detroit, Michigan. And there's many other cities other than Detroit that are in need. But he drives up to Detroit, Michigan with no plan, no expectations, and he goes into a little town called it's called Pontiac, Michigan. It's just a suburb in Detroit, and he buys a house for $1,000, a two-story house, which shows how the value of the community has just dropped. It's tanked because of the condition, the poor living conditions, the poverty, the crime rates were so bad. In fact, just 2 weeks prior to buying the house, that somebody had vandalized the house in some way. The value of it was just dropped. He just bought it with no plan, no expectations. He began to fix it up. He began to plant a garden. He started going to his neighbors next door, meeting them. He even started a church. At first, he went to ask churches to see if they wanted to partner with him in this ministry, and they said they didn't want people like that in that community to come to their churches. So Coleman had to start his own kind of church service in the house and in their neighborhood. And ultimately, today, 10 years later, he started this ministry, and it's thriving. There's people all over the country of Churches of Christ who visit every summer and all year round. They have internships. They have made a difference in the little community of Pontiac, Michigan, and it's really a beautiful thing. But my point is with that story is, could you imagine if Coleman went to Pontiac, Michigan, he bought a house, and he walks up to his neighbor's door, and the first thing he says is, "You're a sinner, and you're going to go to hell if you do not follow Jesus." I would imagine if Coleman did that, it wouldn't have ended up too well for him, right? Considering context, right, that Coleman's approach was to interact with people, to not just throw the gospel in their face, but to show it to them, to love them. And I think this is so important when we're considering how do we interact with the people who are different from us across the world, but especially here, even in our own culture. Now today, I'm going to be spending the rest of my time here in Athens 17. which is where Paul goes to Athens and he gives one of his famous speeches in front of the entire Athenian people. And so just a little background knowledge on Athens is Athens was a very progressive culture at the time, very thoughtful, philosophical. You probably know all the famous philosophers, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, very open to new ideas, but also a very immoral and unethical people. And honestly, when I think about this passage, when I think about who Paul's dealing with, I kind of think to myself that this isn't too much different from our culture even. Very open to new ideas, so many ideas that float around in our culture, so many things, lifestyles that people pursue. It's not very different, but also out of that comes a lot of immorality, a lot of things that we don't agree on. Now, during Paul's time, idols and art was very explicit, very inappropriate, and it shaped their view of how they lived their life. It led to a lot of immorality for how sex was viewed, how people were used, especially women and children. Now, Paul walking into this, it wasn't very hard to see how lost these people were, how lost they were in their desperate pursuit of philosophy and knowledge. And I'll read chapter 7, verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. That he saw this, and he was provoked. The Spirit touched his heart. And, Paul goes and talks and reasons with the people in the synagogue. Now, before I get on to the next part, I want you all to think about somebody in your life who is in desperate need of God. They don't know it, but they don't know God, or they have a fuzzy picture of who God is. I'm sure we all come across somebody either on a weekly basis, a daily basis maybe, or even a monthly basis, somebody that we know in our hearts and our minds that does not know God, that is in need of God. And I just want you to keep this person on your mind for the rest of our time here today. But Paul saw these people's immorality, the dangers that they were in, and that they were people who were in desperate need of the one true God, and not all these idols. Now, Paul wanted them to see their problems, but he didn't want to get to that first. He wanted to be a bridge between them and a relationship and God, or ultimately he wanted to show them the bridge that Jesus created for them. And so the question becomes, how do you approach a people like this? And I think it's important to ask that question, and in order to answer that question, I think we have to answer this question. How do you see people? How do you see people? When you look at a person, what comes to your mind? Do you see them according to their relationship to God, or do you see them according to the relationship with you? Do you see them as attractive or unattractive, rich or poor, big or small, intelligent, unintelligent, athletic, unathletic? Are they just some person I interact with here and there? Do they just fill some role so that I can get by in life? Are they just some random person? Now, when we do this, when we see people according to these kinds of identities, what we are doing is we are providing an identity for them, decided by us, not by God. We see them as a people with an identity provided by us. My youth minister was really good at this thing where whenever we would go to a restaurant or whenever we encountered a service worker, we'd be sitting at the table and he would always look at their name tag. He wouldn't ask them for their name unless it wasn't there, but he would always look at their name tag and he would get their name, and he'd be so great about, not just waving at them, not just saying, "Hey, you, can you go get me a side of ranch or something?" He was so good at saying, "Hey, Avery," say their name, or "Hey, Noah." And I always thought that was, I was like, that's weird. Like, why do you go out of your way to know their name? Like, I don't know. I've never done that. And but it was so important to me because as I've grown older, and I'm not saying that I'm great at this. My youth minister, this is something he's really good at, but he saw them as more than just a person. He saw them as more than just a waiter or a waitress, somebody who brings me my food. But he saw them as somebody with feelings, as somebody with a heart and identity, somebody with characteristics, likes, desires, a human being, but ultimately as somebody made in the image of God. People are human beings, and they're not just there for our pleasure. And we must see people like this, see them according to their relationship with God as someone made in the image of God, and not people made in our images. So how do we build bridges? I'm going to give this next statement. It's probably not going to make sense, but I'll explain it. We build bridges by, it starts with a burden for the spiritual condition of people around us. It starts with a burden for the spiritual condition around us. And what I mean is the bad stuff, the poor decisions that people make, the terrible things that they surround themselves with. When we notice these things, or when we see these things in other people, we see those issues as the fruit of their current relationship with God. A burden in their lives that reveals their poor spiritual condition. Ultimately, what is keeping their relationship? What is keeping them from a relationship with God? Now, Paul sees, he walks into Athens, and it's so evident. He walks into Athens and he sees the Athenians' burdens, and they reveal a poor spiritual condition. They believe in all these gods, all these different ideas. They're not even sure which one to choose. And it led to a lot of immorality. And he doesn't march in with an angry monologue, but rather a dialogue, a conversation. Verses 17 through 18. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews, the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day. I keep an eye on that word reason. Every day, with those who happen to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher or of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." Paul talks, he converses, he reasons to those in the synagogue, the marketplace, with intellectual philosophers. Paul is talking about something that sounds crazy. I'll be honest about that. And we've talked about this before. They call him a babbler, but he's talking about God being a man, becoming a human, dying for the sins of the world, being raised again to life. This has to be just a weird, crazy idea. It's obviously something they haven't really heard him speak on before, because next, in verse 19 through 21, they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So they took him to the Areopagus, filled with smart, brilliant people who discussed the latest topics. I can't think of anything really similar to this in our culture, but off the top of my head. But this is how Paul will start his sermon. Verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive in every way you are very religious." He doesn't start his sermon and say, "You sinners." He doesn't start his sermon that way. He says, "You are very religious." He affirms them. He says, "You're very religious." He's complimenting them almost. He gives them an affirmation of a searching heart. He sees that their hearts are searching for something. All these gods, even gods that aren't even named, he's affirming them. He recognizes that you are a very religious and spiritual people. He's complimenting them, but he's also noticing that they have a hunger in their soul. That they have a hunger in their soul. And I think of the woman at the well, right? In John chapter 4, Jesus doesn't come up to the woman at the well, and he doesn't rant and rave about all her marriages, her her divorces or anything. He definitely mentions it, right? He mentions it, he addresses it, but he talks about her need of thirst and how he can provide her with an eternal drink. Now here in Athens, Paul doesn't rant and rave about their idolatry. He mentions it, he calls it ignorant, but he knows that behind all that idolatry is a thirst for spirituality, and he is affirming that. We'll read the next verses. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Now when Paul gives that whole passage, I know that was a lot to take in, but when Paul does that, he doesn't give one single Bible verse. And even if he did, they wouldn't have recognized it. I mean, he's talking to a bunch of people, Greeks and pagans. I mean, there may have been some Jews in the audience, but he doesn't give one single scripture. He's telling them the story, just the general story of God and his people, and ultimately he will lead to Jesus, but he's telling them the story. He doesn't get into all the details, right? There will be plenty of time, right? There will be plenty of time later to get into all the details about the Bible, all the doctrines and dogma and all those other things. And by the way, just a side point, many people hesitate to reach out to others because they feel like they don't know enough. And I just want to give you an encouragement, just real quick. Don't let what you don't know keep you from sharing what you do know. But what Paul does quote in this passage, he quotes lines from a secular Greek poem, something that these people would have recognized. He's using words, language, culture that they understand in his argument, his presentation, so that they can listen and engage and appreciate his message. Christianity is not about people coming to listen to the gospel on the church's terms. We often think that if we just get people through those doors, and that if we get them through these doors, and if they hear the gospel that the Church of Christ has to offer, that they're just going to figure it out, or that we've done our job, and now it's God's job to work on their heart. Like that, this is how we think we ought to minister to people. And I'm not saying that it's bad to bring people through those doors, or that it's bad for them to hear a lesson on a Sunday morning. But it's about the church humbling itself to give the gospel in a way that people can hear it. Going the extra mile to seek people out where they are, not where they're not, to give them a message that they can actually hear. We can get to all the heavy, all the meaty stuff and hard stuff later. We're talking about building bridges. We're not talking about building skyscrapers right now. Although bridges are probably hard as well, and I think I'm making that point. Now, he'll next go on in verses 29 through 31. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine building is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now, if we go through all this hard work to understand and listen and choose our speech wisely and carefully and use context, right? Yet we don't share Jesus, we've missed the purpose of why we're building relationships in the first place. They don't have to understand all of it. They don't need every detail. But the direction, the credit, the praise, it all belongs to Jesus. Without Jesus, the relationships we build become a bridge ultimately to nowhere. And in verse 32, now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this. We can build bridges. We can work so hard. We can do all of these things. We can build bridges, but not everyone will cross over it. That is a hard reality as a Christian, as somebody who believes in Jesus. Not everyone will cross over it. That's something we do have to accept. Now, I kind of want to finish my discussion here with a question, but I got a little more after that. But if people followed you, would they be led to Jesus, or would they be encountering other gods? That if people followed you, would they be led to Jesus, or would they be encountering other gods? Now, I'm not talking about, Zeus or, the gods of 1,000 years ago, although it may be other gods, but I'm more talking about, would they be led to other kinds of idolatry? Fame, money, possessions, just doing silly things, or, silly things aren't bad, but maybe bad things like drugs or certain things like that, or just getting into the wrong kinds of lifestyle, the lifestyle that Jesus doesn't prescribe. That when people follow you, are they led ultimately to a life that is better for them, or a life that is worse for them? I think that this is an important question, that when we interact with people, even on a daily basis, even if they're not best friends, or even if they're just acquaintances, when they come into an interaction with you, do they look at you and say, oh, there's that crazy Christian Noah that always throws sin in my face and tells me that I'm not going to make it to heaven? Or do they look at Noah and say, oh, he doesn't got it all figured out, but he at least treats me nicely. That's the kind of guy I want to hang out with. And do they subscribe that kind of feeling to you? I think that is important. That when you spend time with people, is your attitude and demeanor pointing them to Jesus? Now, as you go into the world this week, many people around you in your neighborhoods or your daily walk, they'll be seeking out many things, and we see this all the time. Many of you will interact with people who are lost, hurting, broken, and they don't know it, or maybe they do. But God is calling all of us to relationship, and not just to each other in this room, although we love our relationships in this room. He wants us to build bridges outside of this room, in our community, to take the time to build paths that will last a lifetime, that would ultimately lead them to a God who provides salvation and grace and relationship for eternity. And I want to finish with a paraphrased quote. You may have heard of him. He's a youth minister in Nashville. His name is David Skidmore. I don't have it on the screen because it's a paraphrase and it's all over the place. But David would always finish his big lessons with the same phrase, no matter what the topic was. And I always thought it was a beautiful quote. He would ultimately say this: all I can do is put the word of God on your heart. Whether that's through my actions, through my deeds, through word of mouth, the way that we treat and talk to other people. That way, when your heart breaks, and it will, your heart will break, it will be the first thing to fall through. Now, if you have any needs at this time, if you need to talk to someone, if you need baptism, confession, we ask that you come forward or find someone after the service is over, but please stand as we sing.